Hey guys, it's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. From the first clip you saw, can you guess what we're doing? We are going to a Karin Slaughter meet and greet book event. I don't know how to describe it. She's on a book tour for her latest book, and she's going to be talking about it and I think signing books, but it's a pre-signed book we get as we enter. So I don't know if she's going to sign some books, but I brought my books just in case, and I'm excited about it. I think it's called We're All Guilty Here, and it's like the main character is a detective, and she's, I think, back in her hometown, and she's solving either two missing girls or like a murder or something like that. I don't know, but it's Karin Slaughter, so it's going to be good. Yeah, so let's go.
It's really a self-made man.
She's the author of more than 20 instant New York Times best-selling novels, including the Edgar-nominated Coptown and standalone novels Pretty Girls, The Good Daughter, and Pieces of Her. She's published in 120 countries with more than 40 million copies sold across the globe. Okay, that is just unbelievable, isn't it? Raise your hand if you've read Pretty Girls. Wow. Did anyone else have to put it under their bed like I did when I was reading it? Oh, look at all the heads. I love that. I told Karin, this was under the bed, between the mattress and the box springs and the refrigerator. Yeah, you all get it, right? Pieces of Her is a #1 Netflix original series starring Toni Collette. Raise your hand if you watch that. Do we have any Will Trent lovers in the room? I know, amazing. As you know, it's on ABC, but it also streams on Hulu in the US and Disney Plus internationally. False Witness and The Good Daughter are in development for television. I can't wait for that. Whew, so exciting. Slaughter is the founder of the Save the Libraries Project, a nonprofit organization established to support libraries and library programming. A native of Georgia, she lives in Atlanta. So that's what you get if you look up Karin's bio, which I love. But now I have to tell you just a couple of fun things that I love about Karin that she doesn't even know I'm saying. If she falls to the ground and like crawls out, let me know. Did you know that she wrote her first novel in 3 months? What the heck, right? Are you kidding? I couldn't believe that. I'm sure you all know this. You know she's a cat lover, right? Okay, everyone's like, yeah, we know that. That's old news. Did you know that what she did before she was an author? She had a very successful sign business. Isn't that interesting? We could use her here in the library to help with a little bit of signage. So Karin doesn't always listen to music, but when she does for inspiration, I love this about her. She'll listen to country songs about lost love, murder, wanting to kill your husband, cheating on your wife, because you know those songs really give her like inspiration and the right frame of mind for the kind of writing she does. And then last but not least, you know how so many authors write under a pen name? And because of the type of books that Karin writes, I always thought she just made her last name up, right? Karin Slaughter, it's got to be made up. That's her real name. So really, she was destined to only write these types of books, right? Please put your hands together and welcome Karin Slaughter and Claire Eisenbach.
Hi everyone. What a crowd you have here tonight.
Good looking group.
I know. So here we are to celebrate the release of your new book, We Are All Guilty Here. And this is what? Book number 25?
25, yeah.
25. So we would like to start out the conversation by having everybody remove the flap of your book and just look at the little special note that Karin left you all. Isn't that cool? So book number 25, one a year, really remarkable. I know, I'll let that sink in. It is pretty cool. I feel like all of us book lovers really appreciate a great cover, so it's quite critical actually. Okay, but we're gonna kick off talking about your new series. Is there anything in particular you'd like to lead with by like summarizing the book? 'Cause I have a lot of questions about some of the characters, but I think maybe we should set the stage first and you can talk a little bit about it.
Well, so first I should say this is my 4th stop on my U.S. tour, and I'll answer the question that everyone asks, even though you're supposed to be very excited about this book, is that yes, I'm going to write more Will Trent novels. Absolutely. This was a lot of fun to write because it's the first time that I actually wrote a book knowing it was going to be a series. You know, my first book, Blindsided, it was my first book. I didn't know anyone would read it, let alone want to read a second one. So I sort of just threw everything in there that I could. And when I started writing about Will Trent, I still wasn't sure how it would be received because I had just finished my Grant County series. And if you have questions about that, please don't spoil that series for everybody else. Be very careful how you ask about it. But this one I knew, I mean, I'm at a point in my career where I know they're going to keep publishing me for at least a little while. So I knew that I would be able to really do a lot of world building in this book. And so I created a county in southwest Georgia called Clifton County. It's on the Flint River. If you have ever been through the Atlanta airport, which I'm assuming everyone here has, then you've been in the headwaters of the Flint because they're under the Atlanta airport. So it felt like a really great river to set things on because it kind of touched all my readers and my international readers. I could always say Atlanta airport and everyone would groan, even though it's an amazing airport. So I set up Clifton County. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was a little bit influenced by the Murdoch murders in Carolina, where you had this one family that ran things for generations. And as an American, I feel this too, where we sort of idealize small town life, even though I think fewer than 18% of Americans live in small towns. Probably because there's lots of murders there, apparently. But I wanted to kind of return to my roots. In Grant County, I wrote about a small town, and I made a big mistake there. I made it too small. So there were, rapists and pedophiles and murderers. It was worse than Congress. So, at a certain point, you wondered why anyone would want to live there. So I made this more of a medium-sized town. There are 4 cities in it, and there's a manufacturer of auto parts, there's a technical college, there's outlet malls, there's the county seat of North Falls where all the rich people live, and then there's Emmy Clifton, who is the narrator of the story, and she is the daughter of the sheriff, Gerald. She is a deputy, and the book opens with something that is terrifying to think about. It's the abduction of 2 young girls. And I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but if you've ever read one of my books, if you're in the first chapter, something bad is going to happen to you. But we get the perspective of this young girl, Madison Dalrymple, who's 15, and she's really smart. She's got all these really great 15-year-old girl plans to run away from home, and she's going to go to Atlanta and go to a music festival and meet a football player and get married and be very wealthy and live happily ever after. And then, of course, she doesn't know she's in that first chapter, unfortunately. But we meet her on the 4th of July in a sweltering day, and she runs into Emmy, and we get this very brief interaction she has with Emmy that later has a lot of import to the story. And one of the biggest pieces is Madison happens to be the stepdaughter of a woman named Hannah, who is Emmy's very best friend from kindergarten. And the fact that Emmy said to a 15-year-old girl, I don't have time to talk, which if you've ever met a 15-year-old girl, it's hard to tell, or a boy, if something is earth-shatteringly important or just kind of not important. And so Emmy brushed her off, and she regrets that, and it really breaks up her friendship with Hannah. And the rest of the book, of course, it's a thriller, so there's more thrilling things that happen, but that's basically the opening.
Okay, so can you talk about then, that's a great kind of setup to, you know, we are all guilty here. Obviously, it surrounds guilt, and clearly Emmy feels a tremendous amount of guilt, which is a very powerful character motivation. So given what you said about how this was the first book that you knew was going to be a part of a series, how did you forecast out the rest of the books in the series? And how did you kind of start it here grounded in guilt, for example? I know it's kind of a two-pronged question, but...
Well, the title, We Are All Guilty Here, is something Emmy says later in the novel. And she's saying, you know, we all miss things. We're all guilty of not paying attention to stuff that's important, or we later realize was more important than we gave it credence. And so that's something that happens in the real world too, right? We're all prone to realizing in retrospect that we should have paid more attention to things. But as far as the world building and knowing about more books in the series, that was a lot of fun because I was able to people this with a lot of Emmy's family, the Cliftons, and there are good Cliftons and bad Cliftons and rich Cliftons and poor Cliftons, and there are annoying cousins and brothers who are checked out, and all the different relatives in between, and a very meddling aunt, and all of these other people who I can later call on when I'm telling stories. And I was able to plant at least 4 different stories in this one that I can follow up on, and hopefully there'll be more.
Oh, that's cool. So you kind of planted. Did you outline this first book and then the future ones then? Is that a part of your process?
Not really. You know, when I write, it's the typical way to phrase this is, are you a plotter or a pantser? Like, do you plot it or do you go by the seat of your pants? I'm much more of a plotter, but I will pants it in between. You know, there's a lot of different emotional beats, but for me, I have to have a very solid framework of the plot so that I understand it, because I have to explain it to you. And if I don't have a firm grasp on this plot, then you're not going to be able to really follow who I want you to follow, you know, and who's the red herring and who's the suspect and who's the bad person and all these different things. One thing that I've always done from the beginning of my writing is I always know before I start a book who the bad person is. And I'm saying bad person and not bad guy, because sometimes it's a woman. And I think it's really important to play fair with the audience. So I do put in clues along the way so that if you get to the end, you think, oh, I can't believe I missed it, instead of, wait a minute, where did this butler come from? So it's really a juggling act. Yeah, it's a juggling act, but you know, I like when I read thrillers to be able to put the pieces together and figure things out too, and have the information and process it along with the detectives. So that's a really important piece of my writing.
It kind of keeps you interested in writing the story. So what was the spark then that inspired Emmy? And can you talk a little bit about why you wrote a female sheriff, for example? Because I think that's not something that's present very often, at least in the crime fiction that I read. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what the inspiration was behind her.
Well, we actually have fewer female law enforcement officers now than we did in the 1970s. Because in the 70s, after all these rights were passed for equality, and I won't call it what other people are calling it because I don't want anyone to get angry, but the government thought, you know, we need police forces to look like the people they're policing. And so they gave all kinds of grants to incentivize cities to hire women and minorities. And in Atlanta, for instance, I wrote a book called Cop Town, where this was hugely successful and brought down the crime rate precipitously, because women don't have the physical strength that men do, and they became masters of de-escalating situations. And at the time, a lot of the male cops had just come back from Vietnam, and they had a lot of PTSD that was completely unprocessed, because men aren't supposed to have feelings. And a lot of them felt a lot of anger, and they took these jobs to carry guns because they were comfortable carrying guns, and their solution was to be very physical. And so women came along, and they were able to talk people down and still get them in the squad car without having a use of force violation. And the city thought, oh wait, hey, we're paying less money for use of force violations. That's great. So it was really effective, and I'm hoping we see a return to that, because policing can be a great and rewarding job, and we need all kinds of people from all different kinds of communities in these jobs. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose Emmy. Particularly sheriff's departments are not peopled with women. They're not peopled with minorities. They usually serve more rural areas. They're chronically underfunded. We talk about defund the police, but smaller communities have been defunding police for at least 20 years. So it's a really difficult job. It's really dangerous. And most of the police officers and sheriff's department deputies are not being paid enough money, so that they have to take part-time jobs in order to supplement it. So, all of these things were topics I thought would be interesting to talk about through Emmy.
So did you kind of always know, though, in the back of your mind that it was going to be Emmy, or did you explore all of this and then you came to the conclusion that it was going to be Emmy?
No, I always knew it was going to be Emmy. You know, it's interesting because she's a very, very millennial Gen X character, because she is raising a son, she's in a crappy marriage, and she's dealing with aging parents. And most women,
Sums it up.
As I had an elder millennial woman say, "You see me," but I'm going through it, with my father, who is not a very good patient, and he's a cranky old man. So he's not here. I can say that. And it's really hard, and on top of that, to have to do your job is exponentially more hard. And a lot of women will say, I would much rather be at the office than be at home, because it's just easier. You have clearly defined rules, and you can leave right at a certain time. So I thought it would be really interesting to write about that, and about this friendship that Emmy has with Hannah. In a lot of ways, getting rid of her husband would be a lot harder than losing her best friend.
That's so interesting, especially because female friendships and that bond are usually just have so much depth to them. So can you talk a little bit then about how you, as a writer, what's your process for pulling from your own emotion and putting that on the page? And do you ever find that it affects your headspace when you do that?
Not really. It never has. I tend to write in a very visceral way. And so people ask me, do you get scared? And I don't, because fear comes from not knowing what's going to happen. And obviously I know what's going to happen. What is really difficult is the emotional fallout. A novel like Pretty Girls, that was really difficult to get the emotions right and the balance of humor. I don't get a lot of credit for it. There's a lot of humor in my books, and a lot of situations that, particularly to women of a certain age, feel very familiar. And I really enjoy that, but it is something that I try very carefully to capture, because I don't think a lot of the emotions and feelings of women are written about in novels. Or sometimes they're a stereotype, or sometimes they're exaggerated, or there's a tendency to make everything all right, which is great. You know, men have superhero movies and Jack Reacher, and they never worry something bad's going to happen to Jack Reacher, and he's always going to be the most beautiful woman in town and have great sex, and she's going to be totally fine with him going on to the next town. And, you know, she's like, I'm just in it for the sex, right? And we never talk about how those are like male romances, right? It's sort of like we don't talk about how Coke Zero is Diet Coke for men. And I love Jack Reacher. I love Lee Child. I read all of them. But, you know, I'm not writing those sorts of books. I want them to feel as realistic and as emotionally resonant as possible. So I do put a lot of effort into making sure those emotional beats feel genuine.
So that's fascinating. And when you talk a little bit about the humor you kind of embed in your pages, do you do that then to kind of balance out the darkness? Because do you think that there is a point where you can go too far, or do you not really have any boundaries on your writing?
Well, I think every writer has their own moral compass, so I absolutely have boundaries and limits. But I do like writing what I see in the world, and you know, as a woman, women live with like this low-level fear of violence everywhere they go, and I mean, it's not like we're so conscious of it that we can't move in the world. Otherwise we'd be paralyzed. I mean, some women are, but there is always that threat out there, even, you know, getting on an elevator with a stranger, or just walking down the street, or there's so many, like, there was this great thing online that went viral where it's like,
The woman or the bear?
Well, that too, but what would your life look like, a day in your life look like if men just stayed home, right?
Oh, I haven't seen that
yeah,
one.
They're like, I would go for a run at midnight. I would, you know, I would park wherever I wanted. I wouldn't walk with my keys like between my fingers. All these things, and you know, it really is a lot to think about that we don't think about. I had dinner with a bunch of my girlfriends before my tour. And in the way these things go, maybe people were drinking too much. We started talking about the first time a man flashed us. And all of us were under the age of 10. And 2 of us were on school buses going to school trips, right? And just like going by some guy. And he's like, oh, a bus full of children, let me show them my penis. You know, it's like, that kind of thing is just out there. And I think it's important to write about it. And, you know, because it's the experience that a lot of women have had. And if you haven't had it, that's great. That's wonderful. But a lot of women have.
Right. It's so true. And it's this kind of underlying threat that feels almost a little bit like electric.
But you have to laugh about it. Otherwise, I mean, as
You would
my
go
grandmother
crazy.
used to say, you can't fall off the floor.
Yeah.
You know, at a certain point, you just have to laugh about it.
I know, and I feel like that is why, like you talked about, there's TikTok videos that go viral, for example. Like you know, for those of you who aren't on TikTok, there was one also that went viral about presenting the question, would you rather run into a man alone in the woods or a bear alone in the woods? And so often women were saying they'd rather run into a bear alone in the woods, because think about all that can come with a stranger when you're alone. And then also, like you said, it's just a reality that is so unique to women that men just don't have to think about. So knowing that, was Emmy easy for you to write then, it sounds like? And then if so, who was the hardest character for you to write in this novel?
Well, you know, it's, I don't think about hard or easy. I mean, Emmy was difficult. She's very fluent in silence. Which, believe it or not, I am too. When I'm in my business pajamas now, but when I'm home, and you know, I can go for days and not talk. When I'm writing, I go for days and don't even speak. So it's something that is very close to my heart. But you know, there's some I love writing, which her mother Myrna, she has these very quippy, bitchy lines that are every thought I've ever had in an airport lately. And I'm like, don't say it, write it down, use it. I'm not at all a famous person, but every time something horrible happens to me, like, we've lost your luggage and we're delaying your flight by 12 days, and I open my mouth to complain, someone will say, oh, are you Karin Slaughter? And I'm like, guess I'm not going to complain. Yeah, so, she's a lot of fun to write. Emmy's father, Gerald, is a really complicated character. And I mean, I don't think of him as difficult to write. I think of him as exciting to write because, there are all these complications to him that we don't really find out in the beginning. It just unfolds through the book, and I love that kind of writing.
So, not to steer off of We Are All Guilty here because we're going to come back to it, but have you ever in your 25 books judged one of your characters?
Never.
Okay.
No.
Wow.
No, I don't. And I don't in real life either, which is why... Oh, does somebody have Vigo? Oh.
Dang!
Oh, you
Oh, that
should've
happened all at
shouted.
once!
Oh, dear.
Oh. Oh my gosh, they have shirts for you, Slaughter Squad.
I
That's so
know.
cool.
There's two here. Yeah. So did you guys hear that? If you have bingo, write your name on it, and then we'll do a drawing for the 3 winners.
Okay. How are we gonna collect? Are we gonna collect?
Yeah, we'll collect. We'll
Okay.
collect them. Yeah.
Okay, find Liz.
Find Liz up front. And she does take bribes. She is in charge of the foundation, so. I'm spitting the truth here, Liz.
What were we talking? Oh, we're talking about judgment and judging your characters.
Yeah, I really don't. I mean, that's why people tell me really horrible stories, is I don't have any judgment about them. Maybe later I do. I was remembering this story because as an author, I spend a lot of time in the back of cars being driven to airports, and hopefully, there's somebody at the airport with my name on a sign. It's like, why do I just get in their car? This could be somebody who knows I'm going to be there. But one time I was in Pittsburgh, and it was something like, 4 a.m, and this guy was taking me to the airport, and he's like, oh, you're a writer, my wife loves Titanic. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And I'm thinking, not a book. And he says, yeah, she watches it almost every day. I come home and she's watching it. And I'm like, that's great. And the guy's like 70, and I'm thinking, okay, well, is she in a home or, and he's like, yeah, she's so much younger than me. She's only 16. And I'm like, okay, getting a little judgy now. And he just went on about how he met her, but I was like, oh my God. And this guy told me this story 20 years ago, and I still remember it. I remember writing down his license plate. And
Is he a character? Did he make it into one of your books?
Well, it's really interesting because 20 years ago, it was not as shocking a story as it would be today. Because it was something that, some men talked about, right? I mean, I grew up with Brooke Shields at, 14, rolling around in her jeans, and, that kind of... I saw a really fascinating documentary about Brooke Shields. I think it's on Hulu or Netflix, but she was talking about that, and they were talking in general. There was a scholar about how the backlash to the second wave feminist movement was to infantilize women, and okay, well, we can't control women, so now we're going to make girls sexy.
Yeah.
So that's I'm just bumming you out today.
I mean, that is the pop stars of our generation that we grew up with, and it really is.
I love it. Thank you for saying our generation.
I know. Us millennials got to stick together. No, but it is kind of. But it is kind of repulsive sometimes to see some of the interviews with some of these young women and the questions that they were being asked, and and ultimately it really does shape your own view, even if it's subtly, of the world. I was at a conference one time, and an author said that they use their writing as a way to kind of process the world. And so you almost said that you kind of use it as a way to examine the world. But do you think it's kind of a mixture of both, where you're, how has that evolved, I guess, is the question that I want to ask over the 25 books that you've written? Or has it changed a lot, or That's a pretty loaded question, but.
I don't know. So my first book, I really decided, I think as an author you have to make a decision when you write a book. How realistic do you want to be, right? And it's a very personal choice, and some writers don't want to get into stuff, or they want to close the door on the bad stuff happening, and that's great. I mean, I love those sorts of books too. I like all kinds of books. I think it's wonderful to have so many choices. But for me, it felt very personal, because when I was growing up, my grandmother was horrifically abused by my grandfather, and we never talked about it. And she would have a broken bone or a black eye or a split lip, and my uncles, who were like these 7 strapping 6-foot-something guys, would tease her about being clumsy. And I remember saying to my sister, when I figured it out, nobody's that clumsy. She said, we don't talk about it. And it was just something that we didn't discuss. It was considered personal and between them. And I know that not talking about it only protected him. It didn't protect her. So when I wrote Blindsided, I decided I'm going to talk about it. I'm not going to gloss it over. I'm not going to make it a private thing. I'm not going to attach shame to it. I'm not going to have that judgment that we still have today, particularly women. When we hear about another woman who's assaulted, we want to know what she was doing, what she was wearing, all these questions before we feel sorry for her. And particularly if she's pretty and blonde and young and pregnant and dies, it's like, oh, wow, yeah, we're totally going to be obsessed with her now and really feel bad for her, right? So there's just all these weird judgments that are made on victims of sexual assault. And so I wanted to write about it realistically. And, I don't always write about that in my books. There's a book I wrote called Cop Town, where 5 men are murdered and nobody cares. I'm sorry, guys, but your lives are meaningless in fiction if you're murdered. And my next book, I killed 1 woman. And,
kind of true.
And people were like, wow, this is so violent. I'm like, what about the 5 men that were murdered? They're like, oh, well, that was fun, but yeah.
Forgot about them.
So it just felt really important for me to write about that, and to write about, sometimes victims of sexual violence are not who we want to be friends with, and they do make bad choices. And we never say, we always say, why was she there? Why was she drinking? We don't say, why did this person feel like he had a right to rape her? And that's the question I think we should ask. And when we talk about statistics, we say, according to the FBI, nearly 250,000 women in America report being raped every year. We don't say, according to the FBI, 250,000 times a year, a man raped a woman, right? So it just, the language about it shifts the focus, and we're all responsible for that. We all don't ask those questions and think about them. And please don't think that the book doesn't have lots of sex and violence and fun stuff. We're talking about some heavy things here. But I'm very conscious of those statistics as I write.
Right, and the obligation that the community has and plays a part of, hence the title of your book, I'm assuming. But to circle back on that a little bit, and about how realistic you decide to go, it's interesting because, to be completely honest, I have to very sparingly dabble in crime fiction, and I think that is because so often it's centered around female victims. And I feel like the world is scary enough. I don't need to be scared even more. But the Murdaugh trials really pulled me into, and it was fascinating. And it was fascinating to see, as you said, the influence that this family had over a town, and how it permeated throughout in so many ways, into so many different families. And it was the first time I actually watched a trial. I watched the trial, and I watched the witnesses on the stand, and I learned so much. And literally, you can basically pull anything from someone's phone. But okay, to ask the question, can you talk a little bit more about how that was inspiration here? And you do like to really dive into the details in your work. And how do you do the research there? Or, does that really, really interest you? And that's why you always want to include it. If you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, it was more the idea of a family, because we have a lot of families that run small towns. We have a lot of families, we have dynastic families who run things. Look at the Mannings, we could get rid of them, right? But I'm fascinated by that, what happens when one group of people has such tight control on, policing and the legal system and housing and all of these things that are pressure points in society. We as a community have to believe in our police department, otherwise they have no authority, right? We have to believe in these institutions, and without that, there's just chaos. So that's the thing I was thinking about, because I know that after the Murdoch thing was exposed. All right, Liz, get the bat. After it was, they saw a huge spike in crime, because people were like, well, if these people who were held up as the great people of the community are this bad, I'm going to do some crime in myself. And so it just really has this knock-on effect, and I wanted to write about that. As far as research, I've been very lucky that from my second novel, I had a guy who is a medical doctor in Texas. He's a wonderful man. He worked in an emergency room. He was a teacher. He did life flights. He's just very knowledgeable. He's married to a pediatrician, and his brother works on a body farm. So, we're the perfect, throuple, I guess, because they give me all that I need as far as forensic stuff. And I know a lot of retired police officers and Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents, FBI agents. I can call on U.S. Marshals, and I can say, well, how would this work, and what would happen, and particularly with this, where we're dealing with child abduction, there's just so many statistics. And one of the things I feel like it's being an author who writes very realistically, it's important people know that fewer than 1% of child abductions are from strangers. It's Uncle Bob or Aunt Myrna, or people who target children usually are in positions where they have access to children, and they don't have to steal them away in order for the bad things to happen. So, just writing about those statistics and that kind of thing is always a really fascinating puzzle for me to figure out, how am I going to maintain story and tension and all those things, because this is a writer, you can do months and months of research into one topic, and it might end up being one line in the book, and you have to just be very judicious with information that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Liz is pointing at her fake watch on her wrist to me, but I do have one more question I have to ask. About your grandmother and about the abuse, and there are themes of that in this book, correct? And so how did that affect you, seeing that happen to somebody in your life like that, and how has that sat with you over time?
Well, it made me really angry, and as an adult, I was able to have conversations with my father about it, and I think given the time period, that you have to have a certain amount of grace to understand that at the time it was considered a very personal thing. Right. And while my father hated it and didn't want it to happen, obviously, there was that sense that this was something you didn't interfere with, right? But he did do things like, my grandmother lived in a time when a woman couldn't have a checking account or a credit card in her own name, because my grandmother's credit card said Mrs. John Slaughter, right? And so my father, who in his 20s, barely had a dime to rub together, was given a credit card, and he gave it to my grandmother so she could have her own money, and he opened up a checking account so that she could put her money in there, and my grandfather couldn't steal it from her. And that was helpful for her. What it made me want to do is write stories, and weirdly, my grandmother was obsessed with true crime. She loved it. She read this magazine called True Crime Magazine. Some older ladies here might remember it. It was basically snuff porn. It was horrifically violent And every story ended with like, she should have listened to her husband, right? I mean, it was like these cautionary tales. And my grandmother loved, every week she would go to the Piggly Wiggly on Sunday in the bad part of town to get this magazine. And then she would go to the Kroger and get food to cook us Sunday dinner. And while it was cooking, she would read True Crime magazine. And when we would come for Sunday dinner, she would hide it under her chest of drawers. So when I and my sisters got there, after we kissed her cheek, this was the time when you didn't have to see children, so we were locked out of the house after that. Then we would always get the magazine out from under her chest of drawers to read it, and it was horrific. And we would cry ourselves to sleep every night. And we couldn't tell, right? Because we would get in trouble for getting the magazine. And so
did she ever know that you?
Well, I don't know. One year at Christmas, we were trying to find, she was not easy to please. My dad bought her a skillet, and she said it was too expensive, so she put it on the wall because she said it was as expensive as art. And so one year we were trying to find something for Christmas, and I said, let's get her True Crime magazine. Let's get her a subscription so she doesn't have to go to Piggly Wiggly anymore. And Christmas morning came along, and my dad was a sadist because he would not let us open presents until he had finished breakfast. And so usually it was like around 11. And so I couldn't help myself. I was like, Grandma, guess what we got you? Guess what we got you? We got you a subscription to True Crime magazine. And she put her head in her hands and she started to cry. And we were like, oh, we found something. And she looked at my dad and she said, I do not want the postman to know I read that. And so he had to cancel it. And this must have happened a lot because they charge more to cancel it than the actual subscription. But she was just so ashamed. So I know, here I am like talking about the fact that she was abused and she loved True Crime magazine. The latter would horrify her.
That's fascinating. And obviously that has to be where the origin of your love of storytelling, a little, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And my dad is a great storyteller. So it's definitely in the blood.
For sure. Okay, we are going to open it up to the audience. As Karin mentioned, if you could just be very careful about some of the questions that you asked to make sure you don't reveal any sort of spoilers. Yeah.
I'm assuming the crime magazine maybe had some influence on you as a writer.
Yeah, the True Crime definitely had influence on me as a writer because I'm the youngest of 3 girls, and I was terrified, but my sisters were freaked the hell out. And so I would wake them up in the middle of the night with a flashlight and be like, what happened to the dog? I love scaring them. But because I was the baby, like one time we read a horrible story about a woman who was like, her ankle got grabbed on the stairs by an axe murderer. And so I hid under my sister's bed, and when she got in bed, I grabbed her ankle, and she screamed so loud it scared me, and I started crying, and I hid in the closet, and anyone who is an older sister knows this is absolutely true. She got in trouble for upsetting me.
Oh, yes.
You have so many great blurbs on all of your books from all of these amazing authors. Has there ever been a moment where you just like completely fangirled, like, oh my god, I can't believe they've read my books and they like it and they know who I am?
It's funny because I know James Patterson. I don't know him well. Out of the blue, he sent a blurb, and I was so happy. But he said she has the best name in the business, and I'm like, is that marketing, Jim, or what does that mean?
Did you put that on the book?
Yeah, the best name in the business. Like, okay.
Yeah. It works both ways. Yes. Yes.
So with pieces of her, it's always called a standalone.
it's weird. So Pieces of Her and Girl Forgotten are linked books because they have Andy in them, but they don't really have Laura, Andy's mother, and that's why they're more linked than a sequel. And they're very different. So yeah, that's why it's just how publishers do things. In the back. Well, so when I was a little girl in Jonesboro, I would go to my Jonesboro City Library every Saturday, not just because it was the only air-conditioned building, and I would read anything I could get my hands on, and I loved reading. My sisters were basically illiterate, but that was where I would go, and that was just the happiest place on earth for me. And the librarians were so great because they would give me books, and I got to a certain age where I was reading all the great teenage classics like Flowers in the Attic and The Thornbirds and Lace, and they were like, hey, why don't you try Flannery O'Connor? And obviously I loved it because there's a serial killer called the Misfit, or there's a Bible salesman who steals a prosthetic leg, and all these really funny things. And as I got older, I realized, well, one, you have to be deeply immersed in Catholicism to really understand her, but that she was using language as a tool and to talk about the social condition and to pry the scab off humanity, and those sorts of things really resonated with me. I love that kind of writing, and I have the librarians to thank for that, because it was just life-changing. I was very strange. I'm still very weird. I'll own that. And I was often told that the dark stories I was interested in weren't appropriate for little girls, and I needed to stop reading dark things and finding dark humor hilarious, and that I'd never get a boyfriend. I was like, well, okay, then I met Flannery O'Connor through her writing, and she was a very strange person. I mean, when she was a kid, she taught a chicken to walk backward. She was in the newspaper for it, and she had a very dark sense of humor, and she was a writer who was celebrated around the world for her writing. And when the librarian gave me that, I know she gave it to me because she knew I would see myself represented in that author, and it was really life-changing for me.
I'm just really curious. My husband and I love the Will Trent series on TV and reading the Will Trent books. How much input do you have as an author on the stories for the TV show when the books are so different?
So as an author, how much influence do I have on the Will Trent television show? Well, I'm an executive producer also, so I get the scripts beforehand. And I love it. I think the show is great. It's a lot of fun. It's on Disney, so they're not going to let Erica Christensen shoot up heroin and kill her pimp. And that's just the way it is. But Ramon Rodriguez is a wonderful man. He's profoundly sexy and handsome and charming and all the things that you'd want Will to be. He gets to the heart of the character. He doesn't necessarily look like him, but you wouldn't want someone who looks like him and isn't a good actor or doesn't really understand Will. So I'm really pleased with it. And in a lot of ways, this goes to this woman's questions about Pieces of Her and Girl Forgotten, because when I wrote Pieces of Her, the character of Laura, she's very close to Toni Collette, just like my idea of the character. And Toni did such a wonderful job that when I was writing Girl Forgotten, I had to keep reminding myself, don't write the character Toni played, write the Laura you wrote about in the book. And I couldn't do it because Toni was just so to the forefront of my mind. And so I had to really just take her out of most of the book because it just wasn't my story. And with Will Trent, because it's so different, it makes me able to keep writing Will Trent novels because they're their own thing.
Let's take a couple more questions and then we'll get to signing. Does anyone else have a question?
Yes. You.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Yes, and then we'll get the woman behind you.
I'm in the middle of a Twisted Women's book club, so no spoilers, but I just wanted to hear maybe a little bit more about that project and how that went about. And then my second question is, I knew about The Good Daughter, but I did not know about False Witness.
Yes. So the Twisted Women's Book Club is to help raise money for international thriller writers because we don't charge dues, and that's how we pay for things. And it's a wonderful organization I wanted to support. And Joe Fender, who's the editor, asked me to write the first story. And he said it doesn't really have to be a story. It can just be something, you know, that meets this criteria so we can set off the rest of the stories in the book club. And I got to use my favorite idea for a title that my publishers have never let me use. It's about a woman who's a thriller writer, and her latest book is out. It's called Death Fuck. So that everybody just got bingo, I think. So that was a lot of fun to do, but it's to help raise money. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
I knew that The Good Daughter adaptation was coming, but not False Witness.
Yeah, so The Good Daughter, we're actually editing right now. We've already filmed it. It has Rose Byrne, Megan Fahey, Olivia Williams, Brendan Gleeson, Michael Dorman, and Paula Malcolmson. So it's a really just an amazing cast. And I spent 71 days on set with them and capturing the story. And I wrote all 6 episodes. So it was quite a commitment to do. I was the showrunner and an executive producer and all these things. It was a wonderful experience. It's going to be on Peacock, hopefully early part of next year, but at least by the summer. And I hope people will love it because I love it. False Witness is still in development, so we don't have a place for it yet, but I'm hoping that in the next few months at least we'll have some sort of movement on that. Yes.
Do you have any characters that you like writing about more than others?
Do I have characters I like writing about more than others? I mean, you know, they're a lot of fun for different reasons. I love writing Sarah Linton because there's always new stuff that I can tell about her. You know, obviously writing Lena Adams, she's just such a mess. And she can be such a horrible person who thinks she's actually a good person, which is a lot of fun. And you know, Will is a great delight. Faith is so cranky. Faith is actually one of the characters I have to do the most research on because I don't have children that I know of. And
You can ask me anytime.
and I read a lot of, I don't like children. You know, I find them very annoying and clingy and they're wet for no reason. They got those soft spots on their head. Grow your head together. And, you know, so it's fun to read mommy blogs because they don't like children either. So I have to do a lot of research and it's like, yeah, it's crazy.
That's how you do your research, is read mommy blogs?
Mommy blogs, God, yeah. They're the scariest thing, I think. They're scarier than pretty girls. And, you know, I did, in the opening of this, someone is pregnant and another woman lies to her about how easy it is just to be a bitch, which I think is hilarious because somebody did that to my sister and it's like, I happen to know you nearly lost a kidney and you dislocated your hip, right? And we never talk like losing your teeth and your hair. And it's like, why doesn't anyone say how horrible this is? It's like, I don't know.
Because you can't escape it.
Yeah. Well, you know you can. Yeah. So yeah, I love finding out details like that and horrifying people.
If you didn't get a chance to ask your question, keep it because Karin will be personalizing books if you'd like your book personalized. As you know, they're already signed.
I love your shirt.
So you can get done before.
That works. Okay, so that was awesome. That was so fun. As you saw, there was like a Karin Slaughter bingo thing, and a lot of people got bingo, so they had to like draw 3 winners, and I wasn't. I didn't get it, okay? And I thought this would happen. We got these so we could like mark out the bingo cards. I had this uncapped in my lap while I was recording this. I thought it was gonna happen. I'm like, no, it's not gonna happen. Y'all. Can you see that? Like a highlighter all over my shorts. But it was worth it. So this was my 3rd bookish event that I've been to where I met the author, got their latest book, signed books, and whatnot. I wish there was so much more events like this around me, but like, it's so scarce. But I will put in the links below the other 2 bookish events I've been to. I've met Christine Riccio and Veronica Roth, and now I met Karin Slaughter. I got a picture with her, got my book signed by her, and I'm so happy. I cannot wait to read this book. I have a lot of other books of hers to read because she's a fairly new author to me that I've discovered her maybe like a year ago or 2, and I've only read 1 book by her. And I need to keep up to date with my authors because apparently she has some of her books that have turned into movies or like TV shows. I did not know about that. So shame on me. I'm being a bad book fan. But yeah. Okay, so in my handy dandy book tote, which one is this? Girl Forgotten. This is the first book I ever read by Karin Slaughter, and it's my favorite. Let's see. I don't want to honk the horn because I've done that before. Where is she? Sign it. I don't know where to use it. There it is. Sorry about my singing. And in all her glory, Karin Slaughter and all those books she's written. This is her 25th book. How crazy is that? Don't mind my messy car. We got her brand new book that I think she said came out Tuesday. We're All Guilty Here. It is colorful and signed and personalized. If I can get it. Yeah. And I recently just got this at the library as I was on my way down here because I'm listening to this on audiobook, so I don't have it physically, but I do now. I hate that sticker. But where is it? Come hither. There she is. And then I feel like this is like one of her backdated books or just really loved books. I got this, I remember, in a free little library. Haven't read it yet. Ugh, there we go. Yes, indeed. I was nervous because I didn't know if she was signing, hold on. I didn't know if she was signing her other books since We're All Guilty Here is a pre-signed book. So I don't know. Actually, I don't know why she did that, if she was just signing her other books too and personalizing them, but I don't know. I don't complain. I got signed it either way. I felt like I was reading The Girl Forgotten and Pieces of Her out of order because I read Girl Forgotten first, and then it's Pieces of Her first, and then it's Girl Forgotten, but I read it out of order. But even she said tonight that they are linked in story-wise, but they're not like first book and sequel. So I found that interesting. So I don't feel as bad. And yeah, and the library is closed and people are driving all around me because they're leaving. So yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you want more videos by me, and I'll see you guys later. Bye guys.